Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Doc Will See You Now. If you have been missing our consultations, thank you for your patience whilst I've been relocating and things like that. But to the matter in hand, which is this evening's interview. Tonight's author is somebody that for many years I have so enjoyed reading their work, hearing them speak, finding out what it is that they are engaged in, because I know that this author is always there at the cutting edge and always there pushing at things. For me, this author has been one of those people who changes the shape of crime fiction by what they've produced. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Matt Wesolowski into the doctor's surgery. Good evening, Matt. How are you?
Good evening, Doctor. I seem to have a case of overinflated ego and a massive head now. Can you do something about it, please?
I'm not sure that I'm a specialist for that, given that I totally stand by what I've said about your writing and by what you do. From Newcastle upon Tyne, a fabulous city in the northeast, English tutor for young people in care, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that later in our discussion. But to say 4 books to date, and published by the award-winning publisher Arenda Books. Those books: 6 Stories, Hydra, Changeling, and most recently Beast. And book 5 is on the way soon. And again, we'll be having a wee chat about that. So, Matt, what I'd love for you to do first, if that's okay, would you take us back to the beginning? And I'd like to know how it is that you became such a crucial part, for me anyway, of the crime fiction world. How did you get into this genre?
See, it's a funny one because I've never been part of the crime fiction world. In fact, I've never really been a crime reader. I don't know anything about crime writing.
Mm-hmm.
I've never read Agatha Christie. It wasn't my scene. I've always been a sort of a horror guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone told me that I should enter a crime writing competition. So I threw something together in five minutes. And it was a pitch for a competition at Bloody Scotland Crime Festival to pitch your crime novel to a panel of publishers and agents. And I was busy trying to write a very, very serious, very Lovecraftian horror novel. And in between writing this very serious, currently still unpublished horror novel, I wrote this sort of little experimental thing called 6 Stories because I've been listening to the Serial podcast. Now, I've always been into true crime. That's the part of crime that's always fascinated me. And I've always been into true crime. And so I decided to write a true crime story that was actually fiction in the form of a podcast, just to see if it would work. And I'd written it in sort of one take and shelved it. And I thought, well, I'll try and pitch it at Bloody Scotland because they're not going to pick me up because I'm not a crime writer.
Yeah.
And then they did.
Oops. Yes.
It was more oops than yes. Like that was the emotion, because then I had to go to Stirling and then pitch it. And I didn't know anything about crime writing festivals. So I took too long to book a hotel. So I had to stay about 10 miles out of Stirling. And I'd forgotten what happened in the book or who'd done it or why. And I didn't know how to pitch a book to anyone. So I thought, well, if I just sound like I know what I'm talking about, it might work. And lo and behold, Karen Sullivan, I was joint winner of the pitching competition along with a few others. It sounds weird, but I felt sort of a bit disappointed at the end because I was like, they were like, here's the winners. Okay, now you can go home. And I thought, okay, well, that was fun. And then I got approached by Karen Sullivan from Arenda Books, who gave me a big stack of books and said, here's my card, send me your manuscript. And I thought she was joking.
because that is a fabulous story. You know, the idea of just going and just seeing, and you never know. And I'm not too sure I'm actually really prepared, but I'll just give it a go. And to
Yeah,
me, again, it speaks to, even in whatever form that was, the strength of what you're writing, or that originality, that, you know, that zest that is there. How were you approached at Bloody Scotland, or was it a wee while later before Karen got in touch with you?
no, it was right there. It was right there at that festival, straight after
Mm-hmm.
we went to a green room after the event, and there were all these people who I didn't know who anyone was, and I think there was probably some crime authors and some agents and stuff, and I just kind of I just stood there in the corner, not really knowing what to do, and thinking, well, my train's coming soon, so I'll probably just have to leave. And yeah, and then Karen came up, and I thought, I genuinely thought she was just kind of felt a bit sorry for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I nearly didn't send her the manuscript, so I kind of tidied it up a bit and sent it off, and then forgot about it. And then a few months later, I get a little message saying, "We." I mean, this is something that I've been pushing for. I've been trying to get a publishing deal and an agent for so long, and like every writer, you rejection, rejection, rejection. But I've always believed in my writing. I think, like, I've always
Mm-hmm.
really, if not belief, I've always been really passionate about it, and the passion to tell stories. And I always thought, well, I'm going to tell stories, even if no one wants them, I'm still going to do it, and I'll give 100%. And just was being rejected and rejected. And then when Karen messaged me, that was it. And then that kind of opened everything up. And then and this was the result.
And so the journey began, which, you know, again, to think that it might not have happened, but it did. And maybe there's no such a thing as, you know, happenstance, that there is a path, and you just have to wait for that path to appear, or you take the chances that are there. Um, but 6 stories, and the number 6, and it repeats. And I just wondered, does 6 have a special meaning for you, or when you wrote the first book, did it have that number of 6 and you thought you'd carry on with it?
No, there's no sort of divine significance to the number. It kind of fits. It fits in a nice sort of way. It fits phonetically. 6 stories. You've got. When I wrote it, I always liked books and stories with lots of different points of view in them. And what I thought was interesting was about a murder from several different points of view, and especially written as teenagers, because if you talk to 6 different teenagers about something, those 6 can be completely polarized views of them, of the same incident. And it's really interesting. I thought, well, that would just be an interesting way. And I just wrote them until it kind of concluded itself naturally. And this was supposed to be a standalone. 6 stories was, in my head, a complete standalone novel. And that was going to be the end of it. And then I'd move on to my very serious Lovecraftian horror novel. Yeah, and now we're 4 books in, with the 5th just finished.
Mm. So 6 stories, podcast, and a protagonist who repeats now through the book, Scott King. And for anybody who's not familiar with your work, could you give us an introduction to Scott? Who is this person, and what drives him?
Scott King has done his best to be a vessel for the story. I never really put much, I won't say effort, I didn't put much effort into creating a character. Scott King was initially based on Sarah Koenig's narration of Serial, which was the narration between the different points of view, and served as a narrator. And I thought what Sarah Koenig in the original series of Serial did very well was to be objective. And what I wanted to write was someone to be objective and not judge and not give their opinion, and almost let the story spill out. And more as I wrote, and the more the books came, the more he got dragged into the mire as such, and it felt completely against my sort of control. And as much as I try not to write about him, the more he gets pulled at. And the more bits of him pop out almost unnaturally, almost without my control. There's little things about him. There's when we talk about deity later, there's some other little things about him that pop out in there too. And it's a really interesting process because I feel like I'm starting to get to know him as the books go on, as the readers are getting to know him, I am too. But he doesn't want to be found out. He doesn't want to be known.
I wonder to what extent is there a bit of alter ego there, knowing, your character, that, not that person to shout out and make a lot of noise and do, and I feel that, again, Scott, like yourself, tenacious, but very undercover about it, I think.
Yeah,
I
I
could be
think
right.
so.
I could
I
be
think
wrong.
so. I'm not one for shouting and making a
Yeah.
big deal of things. I think Scott King, in a way, is a little bit like me. For example, Scott likes to hide behind the stories. He takes a step back and presents the 6 stories. And I think, in a way, that's what I do. I'm not the sort of person to go shouting my mouth off a lot of the time. I feel like I'm not particularly interesting. But my stories are quite interesting, and I think for me that's what's important. The stories are important. The stories are more important than me as a human,
Mm-hmm. I will allow you to say that because it's your work, and so. But what I do feel is that you said that just as Scott believes that those stories can speak for themselves, I think your writing certainly does speak for itself. And I wonder to what extent do you feel that, because the way you write, it is not a typical crime story with all those elements that that those of us that devour the stuff love and know, but you bring different elements in. And to what extent do you think those different elements have brought you the success that you've had?
Yeah, it's a funny one because I brought in, when I wrote 6 stories, and I was trying to write it as just pure crime, and that's something I hadn't done before. I felt like it wasn't me. I thought, this is all right, this is quite fun, but there was something missing. And I was reading about demons from Inuit mythology, because mythology and folklore is something that I've been utterly consumed by ever since being really, really young. There's a wonderful local storyteller in the area called Chris Bostock, and he tells folk tales, and I've been going to watch him and listen to folk tales, like old Scandinavian and Germanic and Russian folk tales told by this guy ever since I was really little. I'm watching the storyteller, Jim Henson's Storyteller, and Rick Mayall's Grim Tales. All those things, folk tales, have been with me so much throughout my life, and I've always been interested in the paranormal as well. That's something else, monsters and ghosts, like that is just me. And I put this element in from Inuit mythology into 6 stories, and it was like the final piece of the jigsaw, and suddenly I felt it was mine. And I don't know if that contributes to success, but what it does for me is it adding the paranormal element, or adding the horror and the folklore element, it makes these stories mine, and it gives me belief in them. And when I believe in the stories, I'm giving my best. And maybe because I'm giving it 100%, because I'm allowed to use that little element of myself that I love, that comes out perhaps.
Thank you. Can we stick with the folklore?
Yes.
Then, well,
Yes,
yeah, because again, the tales, those tales from around the world that just weave magic, however that magic manifests itself. Of all that you've read and heard to date, do you have a tale or a character that is specifically, one that you're extremely fond of?
In my stories or in general folklore?
Okay, let's do both. First of
Okay.
all, tell us your story, and then let's do the general picture.
Okay, well, I think I've kind of got, there's a few. Oh, this is really hard because now I'm thinking of my stuff and thinking of folklore. It's really, really tough. I've always been, I guess, fascinated by the other, you know, the sort of parallel of our world and the other world, and those two things coming close. And that's been predominant in folklore and used like forever and been used as an explanation for things. So if you think about back long time ago, if there was a child born with a birth defect or a mental illness or something, it was framed in the mentality of the age of being taken by the fairies and swapped and being a changeling and that sort of thing. And I find that I find that really, really fascinating, that people would use an external sort of creature to do that. But then you see you have fairy-like creatures all over the world. It's kind of global, used as an explanation for things. But we have them almost today as well. If you think about in the creatures in Hydra, my second book, we have the black-eyed children, who are a very modern urban myth created in the 90s. And it's the same sort of story. It's sort of strange children from another dimension who are dangerous, and we don't know quite what they want. And that idea of like, we don't know what this other dimension wants, what the other asks of us, always fascinates me. Rather than just a vampire or a werewolf, I like the idea of there being this other place very, very close to our world, but we're not sure why, and we're not sure what it wants from us. And I think that goes through my stories, and it's something that used to frighten me as a child, but equally fascinate me as well.
I think, as you know, just drawing on what you're saying, the idea of a way to provide explanation of certain aspects of our world in whatever century, you know, we might find ourselves as human beings, that dichotomy that on the one hand, it's absolutely petrifying, this unknown, this other, but it does take away to a certain extent our responsibility of being able to solve what might not be right.
Or look at something that might not be right, and face it as a society. You know, my last novel that was published, Beast, looks at the idea of the vampire. And you think of the idea of the vampire as a blood-sucking creature that goes around attacking innocent people, when actually the idea of the vampire is all about someone taking. It's all about this idea of taking from other people. And what makes a vampire? You know, only a vampire can create another vampire. And that's a fascinating story. And it's so much easier to say that something's a vampire. It's so much easier to say someone was taken by the fairies. It's so much easier to say there's a nasty thing out there taking our children away than ask, why are our children running away? Why is someone taking from other people? And I think we as a society much prefer to deflect onto another than look at ourselves.
Yeah, the not having to take responsibility for whatever might be there, and we'll come back and touch on that again if we might. Just sticking with folklore, and is there one that you've read and found that you haven't used yet that you would like to?
You know,
if you can say, because it might be due coming up and
oh no, it's okay. I've always really, I think there's been quite recent one. I really like the idea of Slender Man, only because that was quite a new thing, and that was created. So that was like a brand new phenomenon because it was created on the internet, and then became almost a tulpa. And I thought the idea of that was so interesting. And I tried to write a Slenderman story so many different times, and it never quite stuck. And I think there's now been a few other writers who've done it so much better than I could have done. I feel like Slenderman just kind of slipped out of my grip.
Or it might not be Slenderman's time for you, and it could, it could
absolutely. And I feel like I've had to treat these things with absolute respect. I've always wanted to write a vampire story. I've been obsessed with vampires since I was a little kid, and I had this vampires book that actually my son has now and loves. But again, it was one of those that I couldn't quite do it justice, and I felt like unless I can do the vampire right and give the vampire the respect it deserves, I'm not going to be able to write it. But there's a great many. I do love the idea of the Yeti. That's something that I've always wanted to write, but again, I'm not quite ready for it yet.
Yeah,
there's so many theories.
I look forward to when the Yeti appears in your writing. Now, so we've talked of that, that theme that runs through of past or present myths, mythologies. But I wonder if for you, because I know that, writing for you is that considered process, are there any other elements that you feel you have to include? That if, for a novel to have a Matt Wesolowski hallmark, certain things must be present.
I don't go into it thinking that, but there are a great many themes that seem to just come out. It seems to be the other way around. I'll write, and there seems to be persistent themes throughout. And definitely there's this idea of like cycles of people's history, and maybe family is quite a strong theme that gets passed down. Cycles of abuse in families and that sort of thing coming down. And definitely marginalized people always creep into my books. And again, I don't go out thinking, right, well, I've got the paranormal element, I've got the marginalized people element. It's hard because I often don't know what's going to come, and it sounds so pretentious, doesn't it? But I'll usually get a very small idea of what's going to come, and just let the story expand, and these things more often than not come into it. And maybe that's my trademark, but it's kind of not a conscious one.
Not a conscious one. One of the things, again, for me that stands out is the role that a place plays in your creation. Wherever the story is set, it is grounded in a certain physical location. And again, just to say, given the times that we live in at the minute, and going and visiting places isn't the easiest thing, if at all possible, are there places that you think, I can feel a story of mine would flourish, that you haven't managed to either visit yet or develop that thought yet?
Wow. That's a really good question, because I often sometimes think, right, I'm going to go to this place and then a story is going to come, and it doesn't. But I will. But I'll be walking down Shields Road, and I was walking down towards Shields Road not long ago, which is in Byker, which is quite a deprived area of Newcastle, and we saw a mummified rat which had been sort of squashed into the pavement, and it was dead, and it had been there and obviously somehow been preserved and mummified in some way. And it was just such a stark image and such a brutal image. And it's things like that, and that kind of sometimes gives me as much inspiration as, well, I'm going to go to this like vast forest in Kielder or something like that, and wait for the inspiration to hit me. And no, I've tried it. I've tried it a few times. I've tried going to places hoping it'll bring a story, and I think whenever I try too hard, it doesn't happen. So I draw on things like memories, and I do go out quite a lot. I spend a lot of time out in Northumberland, out in forests and ruins and castles, but I also, because I live in a city, I spend a lot of time in cities, and walking around and looking up alleyways and peering at mummified rats.
Watch out for the mummified rat in a subsequent story.
I'm gonna have to give it a cameo somewhere.
I think, honestly, I think you seriously do. Now, let's while we're here, thinking of mummified rats and beasts, let's talk about the most recently published book, although one due out soon. So let's have a little bit more chat about Beast. And I wonder, for readers who haven't managed to get hold of a copy yet, do you want to talk about some of the themes that are there running through this book?
Absolutely. I think Beast is quite poignant and quite in these sorts of times right now. It's about a deprived Northeast community that everywhere I write about is fictional, but they have a basis in reality. And Beast is set in a sort of a coastal town called Ergarth, which is sort of, I based it around somewhere in Cleveland, like possibly Stockton or Middlesbrough, that sort of area that was rich in industry, but has now been cut and deprived until there's very little there for the people and little hope and that sort of thing. But Beast has one of Ergarth is referred to as the Vampire Tower. And it has this legend surrounding it of the Ergarth vampire. Yeah, and I guess a lot of the themes in Beast come down to the fact it's about people who are marginalized and who's the best and who is the worst. And when things go wrong, who do we blame? And do we blame the very beautiful, compelling blogger who everyone aspires to be? Or do we blame the three teenagers who are always causing trouble and setting fire to things? And it is black and white as all that. And I think that's one of the big themes in Beast. The young people, when I first started working with young people, it was in a pupil referral unit setting. So pupils who'd been permanently excluded from every school they'd been to for various degrees of disruption and violence and that sort of thing, who are really on the edge, you know. One of the places it was either there or they're being arrested. I'm working with these young people. You get a lot of things. People used to tell me when I went to work in Peru, oh, you're just going to get spat at and chairs thrown at your head all day. And it was nothing of the sort, you know. Like, I learned that all 99.9% of these young people just wanted a little to be spoken to with a little bit of respect, and they all had a story, and they all had a really interesting story, and a lot of them were fascinating to talk to, and a lot of them were really at the heart of it kids who'd grown up, in some of them in horrific circumstances, and had spent their lives being told that they were trouble or being told that they were nothing. And when you're a young person and that's all you're getting, what are you going to do? You know, you're not going to be able to change anyone's mind. So you're just going to act. It's easier to act like that than try and change. And it was, yeah, there was a lot of those sort of stories in there. And it's hard, emotionally very difficult work, but ultimately so wonderfully rewarding, you know, to talk to a lot of these marginalized people and get their stories. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love what you say, and I'm so glad that you do that work that you do, Matt. Just to return again to Beast, and in it features that very modern phenomena of TikTok. Yeah.
Oh, it's YouTube in this one.
Yeah. and I just wonder, that idea of drawing on these technological wonderments of present day. Do you enjoy working with things like that?
No, no, I really don't. No, I sometimes feel a little bit of pressure. Do I need to put, because like I'm 39 now, and like I know these things, but it's not my world anymore. These things aren't my world anymore. I'm still catching up with these things. And I don't want to be, oh yeah, I'm down with the kids, I know all about TikTok. Like, I kind of, these things are in our society. And what I tend to look at is why these things are in society and why they're exciting and popular. And I think I feel some pressure to stay connected to them. I think because I've got a child, he's 9 now, that I do need to stay a little bit in touch with these things, because it's very easy to say, oh, all young people just do TikTok and YouTube now, and I don't understand it and I'm not going to understand it. Why don't they pick up a book? Because every generation has said the same thing about every
Yeah.
younger generation. So doing that is all you're doing is creating a bigger gap between yourself and the young generation. Why not listen and try and understand?
Yeah.
And why not, if it's interesting to them, why not listen? Like my son's obsessed with Fortnite. Fortnite's great fun, all right, but he's utterly obsessed with it, and he wants to tell me about it all the time.
May I ask, for maybe those of us of an older generation who don't have the same possible connections, what is Fortnite?
Fortnite's like a big online computer game where you all play as little cartoon people, and you connect with people all over the world and shoot each other. And it's really good fun. And you can chat to each other. So during lockdown, actually, me and all my friends who are all around my age, we all play it together, and we have a great time because we can play this silly game. But really, it's about us hanging out and chatting. So it's not a serious game. We're not like dead into it and dead obsessed. Like, it's funny, it's silly, and we can chat to each other on our headsets, and it's nice.
Yeah, and that sense of community.
Yeah.
That, you know, we've had to find new ways of creating that. So I really agree with you, though, about not simply dismissing the latest trend or the latest interest, because I do wonder, you know, does it come from because we didn't find it first, because we didn't do it first, and therefore we just blanketly, you know, condemn it as rubbish?
Oh yeah, I think we do. I mean, like, I've never used an Apple product, and my son has an iPad for school, and I don't really know how to use it very well. And he's like, "Oh, Dad, it's easy. You do this," and he's flicking away on it, and I can feel myself getting irritated because I don't know what to do, what to do with it. And I go, slow down. But what do you do? And I really feel my age, but that's okay. That's fine.
That's fine too. I think the important thing is the not to dismiss, but as you say, to stay connected. Before we talk about deity, I wonder, could we come to the fact that you recently have, on Twitter is where I saw it, that you have put up your 4 books to support a very worthy and very necessary cause, to my mind. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, it was all about the recent vote not to extend free school meals to the poorest and most vulnerable. And it felt like this was, for me, I didn't like to say anything political or get into debates on social media because it's just interminable. But this felt like the final straw that broke the camel's back for me. And it was so angering because, I mean, I've worked with people who have nothing, who, you know, through no fault of their own, through cycles of deprivation and cuts to the most valuable services. And then they're being told, well, why don't you just go and grow a potato in a bag? Do you know what I mean? And it's so patronizing. It's so disgusting that these vulnerable people aren't, that through no fault of their own, they're going to be punished. So I thought, well, it's fine to kind of rant about it, but why not do something about it, you know? So there's a chance for 3 people to win all 4 of these wonderful books. And I will sign them, and I will write your name or a nasty thing about a Tory. Probably can't say that, but whatever. But the point is, is that I wanted to do something. So if you go to justgiving.com/crowdfunding/6 stories and give whatever you can, it can be a quid, it can be 50 quid, and all the money will go to Newcastle West End Food Bank, which will help those poor, vulnerable people who can't afford to eat. And yeah, and I just thought I want to do something, just do something to give back, you know. Yeah, and I felt that's a good cause right now.
It really is. It really is. Tell us again what the crowdfunding page is.
It's justgiving.com/crowdfunding/6 stories, and give as much or as little as you like. It can be a
That's
penny, it can be a tenner, whatever you
that's
like.
brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Thank
Thank you.
you. I again, I think, you know, even if we're not in those positions of power, and maybe, maybe there's a reason why we're not, but we can still do things that make a difference. I truly believe this, the simplest of acts can, you know, can make a massive difference.
Absolutely.
Now, can we move on to deity?
We can move on to deity. I just finished the edits of it this last weekend. So yes, we can now discuss it.
And without spoilers,
Mm-hmm.
and without maybe saying anything that as yet you're not allowed to say, where are you taking Scott to next?
Okay, so I can tell you sort of a bit more than probably you think I can. So this time Scott is investigating the death of a huge pop star, like an absolute pop megastar, who died in a fire at his remote mansion in the Scottish Highlands. This star's name was Zach Crystal, and he was the subject of accusations of abuse before he died. And Scott is kind of looking at that idea of guilt, and that idea of when we put someone on a pedestal and we worship them like a god, what do we let them get away with? It's going to be the same as usual. It will be a podcast, 6 different stories, 6 different people who experienced Zach Crystal in 6 different ways. In between the podcasts, there's always something different. There'll be something different in between the podcast here. I won't give that one away.
No.
But yeah, we will be keeping the same format. It never gets easier, but it's nice to have a framework, I think.
It is. And are you allowed to say what paranormal or mythological, if I can say it, element might be appearing?
Well, it's interesting, this one, because when I originally wrote it, I'd been reading a lot about skinwalkers and the legend of the skinwalker. And that's quite an interesting, in fact, more than just it's a fascinating thing. But funnily enough, that was one of those that kind of slipped out of my grasp again. And I think when we were kind of refining the book, the idea, I felt like I didn't know enough about skinwalkers to do them justice. So I kind of tried to make up my own, and they're a bit too close to be that good. So I've created something fairly new. All I can kind of say, it's a little bit like the sort of the legend of Black Shuck, the sort of one of those dogs. I think fans of Harry Potter will know it as the Grim, a sort of portent of evil or destruction. It's something along those lines, we can say.
Now, I do believe that some lucky people have already had a wee taste of deity, because you've recently done a public reading, haven't you?
Yes, I did Virtual Noir at the Bar for their Halloween episode, which and it was kind of a lot of pressure because there were some big hitters out there. There was Laura Purcell, there was Ian Rankin, there was CJ Tudor. But I did read 7 minutes exactly of the introduction to deity, and I believe you can go to the archives of Virtual Noir at the Bar, and you'll be able to find it in there if you want your 6 stories Halloweeny fix.
Viewers, please get yourself in that archive and get yourself that fix, because honestly, you're in for a treat. And 'tis the season for a bit of fearfulness as well. So definitely.
Because there's nothing else to be frightened of at the minute. Everything's fine. Get a bit of
That's right. There really is. it will be an utterly fabulous night, filled with gruesomeness, madness, and mayhem. I just want to thank you so much for joining me this evening. It is wonderful to get a chance to see you, to chat with you, to talk about your work and see where it's going. I wish you all the very best with Deity, and hope that when time allows, we can meet in the same space and chat some more. Yeah,
That would be really nice, Jackie. It's lovely to speak to you. And yeah, keep
likewise.
going. Your doctor's surgery has a massive queue outside. People are in masks. It's fine.
It's fine.
Um, don't worry,
Social
they're
distancing.
distanced. But yeah, keep getting them in and cure them of their literary problems.
um, um, thank you for night and see you soon. Yeah,
See you, Jackie. Bye bye. Thank you.
bye.